As relations between Ukraine and the U.S. sour, a summit of mostly European leaders draws up a peace plan for Kyiv. Recall campaigns heat up across Taiwan, with both ruling and opposition parties accusing one another of cheating. And Taiwan is facing a critical nurse shortage, leading some lawmakers to suggest conscripts could offer a solution. Plus, despite its struggling economy, China's pet industry is booming. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Leslie Liao. With U.S. backing for Ukraine's fight against Russia wavering, Europe is making support for Kyiv a priority. But the U.S. isn't out of the picture. A new 4-point peace plan will likely need Washington's approval, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he thinks frayed ties with the U.S. can be patched up. John Van Trieste has the latest.
Okay, let's go.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stands in the front row, flanked by leaders from across Europe and beyond. The nations represented here at this summit in London want to make one thing clear. The U.S. may no longer have Ukraine's back in its 3-year struggle against Russia's invasion, but their country's support isn't going anywhere. Together, they've hammered out a 4-point peace plan.
First, we will keep the military aid flowing and keep increasing the economic pressure on Russia to strengthen Ukraine now. Second, we agreed that any lasting peace must ensure Ukraine's sovereignty and security, and Ukraine must be at the table. Third, in the event of a peace deal, we will keep boosting Ukraine's own defensive capabilities to deter any future invasion. Fourth, we will go further to develop a coalition of the willing to defend a deal in Ukraine and to guarantee the peace.
And the plan is already being backed up with action. In addition to a $2.7 billion military aid loan, the UK will give Ukraine export financing for more than 5,000 air defense missiles. The consensus seems to be that more action will follow. EU leaders in particular say that the continent needs to significantly rearm. In addition to raising their own defense spending, leaders at the summit envisioned building up Ukraine's ability to protect itself.
The basis of everything would be a strong Ukrainian army. We should never forget it was not very strong before the war started, and it is now much stronger. There are more than 800,000 soldiers in service, and that's something we should have in mind. That
the VIP treatment of President Zelensky, topped off with a visit to King Charles's private residence, is a world away from the openly hostile reception Zelensky got at the White House last week, leaving a minerals for aid deal up in the air. But the absence of the U.S. at the summit in London is still something the gathered leaders, including Zelensky himself, feel. The 4-point peace plan may need U.S. backing to work. Still, Zelensky says he's not losing hope closer ties can be restored.
Ми розраховуємо на допомогу Сполучених Штатів Америки. Безумовно. І я вважаю, що припинення такої допомоги – це допомога буде тоді виключно Путіну. І тому вважаю, що Сполучені Штати – представники цивілізованого світу, лідери цього світу, і думаю, вони точно не будуть допомагати Путіну.
How realistic this is hard to gauge, as the answer largely lies with U.S. President Donald Trump, whose actions so far have some thinking that in Ukraine and beyond, Europe may now need to go it alone. Andy Xue and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
How is China viewing U.S. President Donald Trump's apparent pivot to Russia? And where does that leave Beijing and Moscow's alliance? TaiwanPlus reporter Louise Watts spoke to Jiayan Zong, a political scientist at the University of Singapore.
How is the Chinese leadership likely to be viewing what's going on with the US, Russia, and Ukraine and that meeting in the Oval Office?
So I guess the PRC leadership probably is going to be treating that whole event quite carefully. I mean, on the one hand, they probably would be relieved to see Donald Trump as being willing to not extend support to actors that previous U.S. administration said they would. Now, at the same time, the Beijing would probably have some concern about Russia perhaps being more interested in trying to drive a wedge between the United States and Europe than in supporting its position in Asia, especially with regard to Taiwan, but also the South China Sea and East China Sea, and so on.
What are the implications or the possible implications for Beijing's own no limits partnership with Moscow if Russia and the US draw closer?
So I guess Beijing is concerned that a Moscow that's less interested in working with Beijing may leave Beijing to deal with the US and a potentially more friction-filled relationship with the United States more on its own. I mean, President Trump has talked about having a good relationship with General Secretary Xi. However, the U.S. has also imposed tariffs on PRC goods. They've also talked about competing with the PRC. So I guess the PRC would treat this whole development with some care, even though they may be probably looking for opportunities to improve their own position vis-a-vis the United States.
There is a train of thought that Trump is playing diplomatic chess to try to drive a wedge between Russia and China. What's your view on that?
I would not rule it out, but it seems that, to me at least, that President Trump is far more interested in creating a world where major powers are dominant and one where institutions are far weaker.
That was Jiayan Zong, a political scientist at the National University of Singapore. A huge recall battle between Taiwan's opposition and ruling party is heating up. Groups aligned with the ruling Democratic Progressive Party and opposition Kuomintang are trying to unseat each other's lawmakers, with each now accusing the other of breaking the rules to do it. Tiffany Wong has the latest.
Taiwan's two main political parties are speaking out against recall campaigns organized against their lawmakers. The KMT says that some of these campaign groups may be using illegal funds to pay volunteers. Recall campaigns in Taiwan led by private individuals are disqualified from using so-called political funding, which can only be accessed by political parties or party members. And they say that these campaigns are instead using under-the-table methods to circumvent these funding regulations.
他那边说什么呢？现场以现金交由有志公正的志工，这样才能保护团队不被攻击。白话文就是，你把现金交给志工，才能够违法的把现金交给罢免团体。
Meanwhile, the Democratic Progressive Party says that the campaigns against their lawmakers may be using the signatures of deceased people, also known as ghost signatures, to meet the 1% of signatures from the constituency needed to establish a recall proposal. And the DPP is accusing the KMT of being behind this, saying that they may be copying a voter registration list and providing that to campaigners to add signatures to their petitions.
只有一种可能，就是国民党利用他们手上掌握的名册，大规模的进行所谓不实联署、虚假联署、抄袭名册的联署。
The DPP claims that some of the named organizers of these campaigns against their lawmakers have even later denied participation in the petitions, leading to questions as to how their names got onto these campaigns. And the DPP says that they're ready to use lawsuits against any signature fraud or election fraud that they can find. As a reminder, this is all part of a massive slew of recall campaigns in Taiwan, over 50 against lawmakers. 19 of those have passed the proposal stage, all against members of the Kuomintang. That means they can then pass on to the petition phase, where they'll need to get 10% of signatures within the constituency within 60 days. There are another 9 campaigns against the Democratic Progressive Party lawmakers that have now been given extra time for signatures as they did not immediately pass that 1% proposal threshold due to errors. And we're expecting more results to be released later this week from about 24 more campaigns. Originally, there were 52 campaigns total established against Taiwan's lawmakers, 34 against lawmakers from the KMT, 1 against an independent aligned with the KMT, and 17 against members of the Democratic Progressive Party. This is all part of clashes between the two parties in the legislature that have since threatened to paralyze Taiwan's government, with clashes over legislation and fierce disagreements over the budget and constitutional court. But a recall can take months, and it comes in 3 stages right now. Most of them are in the proposal stage, trying to meet that 1% threshold of signatures needed to then move on to the petition stage, where campaigners will be seeking 10% of the constituency's signatures. And lastly, it will be put to a vote. The campaigns still have the big challenge of getting through the second petition phase and the final public voting stage to get through. So it looks like these lawmakers and parties are going to be fighting a long battle ahead. Klein Wong, Justin Wu, and Tiffany Wong for TaiwanPlus.
A Taiwanese NGO is accusing opposition Kuomintang Caucus whip Kun-chi of violating national security laws. The Taiwan Economic Democracy Union filed a complaint against Fu with the Taiwan High Prosecutor's Office. The group says Fu claimed to represent Taiwan's government without prior authorization during a trip to Hong Kong in February. It says he also lobbied for direct flights from Pingtan, a Chinese county, to Taiwan after traveling to China in April to meet with officials there. Fu's office said Monday afternoon it had no comment on the situation. Taiwan is facing a critical nurse shortage. Hospitals are getting overcrowded while nurses are leaving the profession en masse. Now, lawmakers are proposing a new solution. Crowded emergency rooms and long wait times. This is the reality facing Taiwan's healthcare system now. The crisis is made worse by a shortage of nurses. Several hundred of them are leaving the profession every month due to work stress. Now, a proposed solution is on the table, using Taiwan's male conscripts. Last year, the Defense Ministry allowed conscripts with nursing credentials to serve out their 1-year obligation at military-affiliated hospitals.
假设我们可以把护理替代役不只推动到国军医院、公立医院或是私立医院，我相信对于目前这样子的状态是可以注入一股活水。
But not all lawmakers believe this is a viable policy.
让这样子医护背景的役男拨到民间私人的医疗院所去，那我想国防军力还是以国防本务为主。
But Taiwan's overworked nurses seem to welcome the idea.
其实一开始是希望都开放，在原来的医院就服兵役的。后来沟通的结果是说，他们要服兵役，还是要到军方，因为他们还是有一些军方要求的东西。低的估计，一年大概会有1400左右的护理师进到职场。
Hands-on experience could be good for conscripts hoping to pursue nursing. And for Taiwan's strained healthcare system, it would help alleviate a chronic, long-standing labor shortage. But for Taiwan's policymakers, it's all about balancing Taiwan's defense against the country's medical needs. John Su and Leslie Liao for TaiwanPlus. Coming up after the break, Israel blocks aid from entering Gaza as progress on extending the ceasefire stalls.
At Connected, we believe in the power of dialogue. It's not just about the headlines, it's about finding common ground. Join the conversation.
Connected with Divya Gopalan on TaiwanPlus.
I'm Ed Moon in Taiwan's Jinmen Islands, and you're watching TaiwanPlus News, the voice of freedom in Asia.
经历过人生的话，你发现说我们大部分都是爱美的。
我自己少遇见一朵花，我可能就不是这个样子。
开始思考什么叫做一个本土性，
大声的唱出来说我是台湾人。
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has halted all humanitarian aid from entering Gaza after Hamas rejected an American proposal to extend the first phase of the truce. The move has led to domestic and international criticism. Rosie Greninger has more.
Backed up and waiting to be let in. Trucks of humanitarian aid sit idle in Egypt's border crossing with Gaza after Israel blocked the flow of the essential goods into the enclave.
ممنوع بدون مسببات، اديني سبب مقنع. اديني سبب مقنع ان الاكل ده يترفض.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Hamas is to blame for the disruption. The group rejecting a proposal to extend the first phase of the temporary ceasefire in Gaza for another 6 weeks. The extension apparently proposed by US Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, as the first phase of the truce ended on Saturday.
וויטקוף הציע את המתווה להארכת הפסקת האש לאחר שהוא התרשם שאין בשלב זה אפשרות לגשר בין שתי העמדות של ישראל ושל החמאס לגבי שלב ב' ושדרוש זמן נוסף לשיחות כדי להשיג הסכמה אפשרית.
Washington is yet to confirm the proposal. Netanyahu says it includes a halt to the fighting until the end of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan and the Jewish Passover holiday, as well as the release of half the remaining 59 Israeli hostages held in Gaza. But Hamas says the proposal is a stalling technique designed to avoid negotiations for a lasting peace and the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza. The group has hit out at Israel's blockade on the Strip, calling it a war crime, while neighbouring countries, including Egypt, criticise the move.
للعقاب الجماعي وللتجويع هذا أمر مرفوض تماما ويمثل انتهاك صارخ وصريح للقانون الدولي الإنساني.
The Israeli government is also feeling pressure from within. Hundreds of protesters gathering outside Netanyahu's home in Jerusalem, urging their government to continue negotiations on a second phase. And for those with loved ones still in captivity, concerns over what comes next.
At this point, we were supposed to be hearing all about the second phase and how Israel and Hamas and the mediators are planning to bring all the hostages back, including my cousin. And all we're hearing right now is that we are going back to war, that Hamas is reluctant to continue, that Israel is not necessarily abiding, but every part of the deal.
And where to next for the millions of displaced civilians in Gaza, who had just begun to try and put their lives back together with the help of thousands of trucks of aid that flowed into the enclave during the ceasefire.
المعاناة حتزداد بعد قرار الاحتلال بإغلاق المعابر، واحنا بصراحة يعني من بداية الحرب وهو يعني وماسك في الخطوة هذه، يعني بيحاول الاحتلال دائما يجوعنا، واحنا خايفين من تجويع الشعب طبعا من قلة المساعدات ومن قلة المواد الغذائية.
In this conflict that has already claimed tens of thousands of lives, renewed fighting could once again leave these refugees picking up the pieces. Dolphine Chen and Rosie Greninger for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan has condemned China's attempts to infiltrate its diplomatic ally Palau with criminal gangs. The Foreign Ministry was responding to a recent report by U.S. think tank Pacific Economics. TaiwanPlus reporter Rick Glaude traveled to Palau in January and filed this special report on how the Pacific nation is battling a surge in organized crime involving Chinese nationals.
An uneasy wait for their long flight home. These Chinese nationals came to Palau as tourists. Now they're being deported from this popular island destination, arrested for allegedly running an online scam ring from a Chinese-owned downtown hotel. The latest in a slew of organized crime cases here involving people from China or the PRC.
I would say all of the suspects that were arrested are PRC citizens, and the suspects from the other cases are all PRC citizens. It appears that PRC is sending their folks over here to Palau to work in these online scamming centers.
As he begins a second four-year term, the country's president, Surangel Whips Jr., is cracking down on organised crime, acting on a list of foreign nationals to expel. Most on the list are Chinese, suspected of involvement in illegal drugs, money laundering and human trafficking. Whips believes it's part of China's attempts to intimidate his country.
Well, we definitely see an uptick in organized crime coming into Palau. Whether it's the online gaming operations, we've had a record number of drug busts at the airport of Chinese nationals bringing in drugs. These are all issues, I think, that help weaken us as a nation.
Situated in the Western Pacific between the Philippines and the US territory of Guam, Palau says it is no stranger to Chinese tactics. With China as its biggest investor and source of tourists, this small island nation has already gone through rounds of economic incentives and punishments from Beijing, especially because of its relationship with Taiwan. With a population of only 18,000, Palau is one of just 12 countries around the world to officially recognize Taiwan, a self-ruled democracy that China says is part of its sovereign territory. High-level Taiwan officials, including the country's president, have been hosted here, visits that Beijing has made it clear it's not happy about, preferring that Palau cut ties with Taipei and instead establish official diplomatic relations with Beijing. Over the last few years, Palau has been hit by suspected Chinese cyber attacks and regularly records Chinese research vessels entering its exclusive economic zone. The Chinese Communist Party rejects allegations of using organized crime for coercion, but many see a pattern in this region.
Chinese organized crime is not a standalone enterprise about which the Chinese government knows nothing, but it very much is part of China's effort to assert itself, to establish its influence around the region and also around the globe.
Experienced in combating Chinese intimidation, Taiwan has been helping law enforcement here, sharing intelligence and lending manpower to investigations, already leading to arrests of suspected scam ring leaders and money launderers. Refusing to succumb to pressure, these two island nations share a common threat, as well as a determination to decide for themselves who to be friends with. Alex Chen and Rick Lowett in Koror, Palau for TaiwanPlus.
China's economy is facing some major challenges, but one sector is standing out and defying consumer trends. Chelsea Wu has more.
From exotic animals, playful apparel for pets, and high-quality certified pet food, the 2025 Pet Fair in Beijing offers it all. Showcasing more than 13,000 pet-related brands, the expo has attracted crowds of pet businesses and animal lovers this year, a reflection of China's booming pet industry.
对对对，这增长，反正每年增长的很多。你看我们的客户基本上，养这种的，然后从1只变2只，变3只，然后甚至养10几只、20只的都有。
This growth of the sector contrasts sharply with the country's struggling economy. China is undergoing a real estate crisis, coupled with low consumption and high youth unemployment. Yet, consumers don't seem to be cutting back on spending when it comes to their pets. Nearly half of pet owners say economic changes would not affect how they care for their pets. They are ready to spend more on food, nutritional supplements, and grooming products for their furry companions.
你可以今天看一下咱们国展这边人山人海，是不是啊？这就反映了一个状况。虽然目前的整体的这个经济这个状况不是说很好，但是说人们就是说还是就是对自己喜欢的东西，他就是还是愿意付出一些。
Last year, China was reported to have around 124 million pet dogs and cats, driving a market scale of well over $40 billion, a 7.5% rise from the year before. Many in China even consider raising pets over having children of their own.
因为现在中国这个独生子女家庭还是比较多的，然后2胎、3胎呢，有些家长可能不是太愿意要，反而会愿意给家里的小朋友来一个这样的小宠物，陪伴他一起长大。
The pet industry in China has defied the country's economic downturn, and with the ever-evolving attitudes towards owning animals in China, the sector will likely continue to thrive and expand in the future. Scott Huang and Chelsea Wu for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's sign language users may soon get a new tool to help them communicate with those who couldn't otherwise understand them. It's a computer program that analyzes signers' motions and it turns them into Chinese text. The program is the work of the National University of Kaohsiung, but the project still has some challenges to overcome before it will be ready for a public launch.
比很快之后，那其实一句跟一句之间怎么样去中断这个困难点，我们目前还没有解决。那另外一个人讲话之后，他能不能也转成手语，让另外一个只会手语的人去理解？那这个方向也是在第2个阶段，我们希望可以完成的部分。
The program is meant to help the 20,000 to 30,000 people who use Taiwan Sign Language in an environment where there aren't enough interpreters to meet demand. And thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. Follow us on social media for more of our stories. Finally, the annual Carnival of Brazil kicked off over the weekend. Here are some images from the parades. I'm Leslie Liao. Take care and see you next time.